Part 7. Pirate Plant Fruit. Author, Lee A Dream. Chapter 67. At this time, Rog and Sanji are escaping in the village. Swarms of shells fell from the sky. The artillery fire blasted the surrounding buildings and roads into ruins, and the flames and gunpowder smoke soared into the sky. Oh my god, wow, why the artillery fire has become more intensive, Usopp cried. Sauron said calmly while running, no, these artillery are attacking our position. At this time, the trajectory of the swarms of shells in the sky were all shooting towards the area where everyone was located. Everything around was shrouded in artillery fire and destroyed. Rog took out the thorn whip, and used the devil fruit ability on his body. The thorny whip in his hand quickly grew to tens of meters. Thorn whip. Defense net. The thorny whip in Rog's hand quickly turned into a giant net in the sky like a swimming snake. More than a dozen shells hit the giant net. Then a violent explosion occurred, and multiple shells exploded above the crowd, and destroyed most of the thorn whip. Zoro also finished all three knives and jumped up. Crow. Demon hunting. More than a dozen shells flying over were cut open, and then exploded violently. I'm coming too. Sanji also jumped up suddenly and kicked away the cannonballs one by one with his superb foot skills. Chopper also turned into a reindeer form at this time and suddenly pulled up the sled. Dr. Gilwa was sitting on the sled. At this time, the Dr. Gilwa saw everyone's liveliness and said happily, today's young people are really lively and lively. Then the old woman who was good at medicine picked up the rum in her hand and poured it into her mouth. You are too leisurely, Nami shouted at her. Vivi, Nami, and Marianne all rode on the backs of fast runners, while the others ran on foot. Usopp was also a little angry when he saw the old woman sitting leisurely on the sled. Hey, you are too leisurely, Usopp said strangely. Dr. Gilwa glanced at him and said, what's wrong, can't I take it easy? Look at these shells, in case one hits the sled directly, Usopp said. At this moment, a shell really flew over. Dr. Gulliwa quickly jumped up and kicked the cannonball away. Ah, I didn't tell you, Usopp said. Dr. Gilwa glanced at the slingshot in Usopp's hand and said, are you a shooter? Usopp said out of breath, yes. Then you can get on the sled, it's easier to aim like this, said the Dr. Gilwa. After Usopp heard this, he was calm at first. Immediately afterwards, his face was full of joy, and he said, it's fine like this. Usopp jumped directly onto the sled. Usopp on the sled swung his slingshot and started shooting violently. Must kill. 3 consecutive gunpowder stars. Usopp fired 3 gunpowder stars from the slingshot in succession. 3 shells flew over and were intercepted by gunpowder star. Dr. Gilwa looked into the air and said, I didn't expect your shooting to be so accurate. Thanks for the compliment, Usopp said happily. Artillery shells kept flying over, and the surrounding houses were razed to the ground. Guys, it's not okay to keep running like this. Let's just destroy the opponent's artillery position, Rog said. Okay, Zoro said. Okay, Usopp and Wei, you all go to take refuge. We will destroy the enemy's artillery positions, Rog said. Usopp stood on the sled and said, okay, then Captain Usopp won't help you. Rog, Sanji, Zoro, and Luffy rushed towards the artillery position. Chiao pulled up the sled and ran as fast as he could to escape. The 4 rushed to the front of the artillery position in one breath. Rog looked around and saw groups of cannons arranged in rows for bombardment. Now it's time to use a new weapon. Roger took out a green thorny cactus from his clothes. This is the cactus on the ancient island, and Rog transformed it. Under the influence of Roger's plant fruit ability, Roger's hand holding the cactus turns green. The green cactus grew rapidly and covered Roger's body. The cactus covered Roger's body like a thick muscle armor. Cactus power armor. Except for his head, Roger's body is now covered in cactus with anthropomorphic muscles. This layer of armor provides resistance to axes and cannonballs. The body is several times larger, and the arms are several times thicker than an ordinary person's after being covered with armor. Luffy looked at Rog and said happily, "Wow, he looks so stylish." Sanji also glanced at it, and said, "It's obviously a cactus, but it covers the body like a muscular man's muscles." "It's enough to fight anyway, don't talk so much," Sauron said. Rog moved his body, and now wearing the cactus power armor, he looks like a super strong man. Rog rushed towards the artillery position of the king's army. The soldiers on the artillery position were shocked when they saw Rog. "What kind of armor is this? Why does it look like a cactus?" Rog's strength was greatly increased after wearing the cactus power armor, and each step of his jump and charge was up to 5 meters. He rushed to the front of the king's army, holding a cannon with both hands. "Give it back to you." Rog smashed the cannon into the enemy artillery. With a burst of screams, several soldiers of the king's army were hit. Roger waved his arms and threw the cannons one after another. The king's army artillery position was in chaos under Rog's overwhelming offensive. The soldiers of the king's army fled in all directions. Soon Luffy, Zoro and Sanji followed. Rubber. Meteor hammer. Luffy grabbed a cannon with his arms outstretched, and threw the cannon like a meteor hammer. Soldiers and other cannon on the Royal Army artillery positions were sent flying. Sauron brandished 3 knives, cutting down the artillerymen as if in no man's land. Sanji kicked the artillerymen to the ground one by one with his feet. These artillerymen were unable to resist the powerful offensive of the 4 men. Jace, who was directing the battle, said in shock, "What kind of monsters are these?" Especially Rog, wearing cactus power armor, running rampant and invincible like a giant elephant. Rog arrived in front of a cannon again, raised the cannon and threw it like a baseball. The cannon slammed heavily towards the area where Jess was. Jess dodged quickly, while the 2 juniors beside him were smashed to the ground. "Damn it, these guys don't care about the king's army at all," Jace said angrily. After all, Jace is also the commander of the drum team. This army is also an elite force. "Pass me the order, the machine gun unit will attack the enemy." Jess gave an order to a lieutenant colonel. Yes, the lieutenant colonel quickly gave the order. Pirate Plant Fruit. Author, Lee A Dream. Chapter 68. The 4 Rogs who were charging at the artillery position had already made the artillery position a mess. There were overturned cannons and dead and wounded soldiers everywhere. "You bastards, get out of here." Rog, who was wearing cactus power armor, punched out, knocking the 3 soldiers into the air. Sanji, Zoro, and Luffy stopped fighting, and the enemies above the artillery positions were all defeated. After all the enemies were brought down, Rog looked at the fallen enemies all over the ground. "Sure enough, these Wapole men came to attack us," Rog said. "Mobilizing so many troops just for us," Sanji said strangely. "But I think they must have other intentions. And from the beginning, they violently shelled the village area. And the resistance forces are also entrenched here. So they must want to eliminate the resistance forces and deal with us by the way," Rog said. Luffy looked surprised and said, "Really?" "Indeed, it's very possible," Sauron said, looking at the mess on the battlefield. "These guys actually said the village was blown up like this." Luffy looked angrily at the severely damaged village. The king's army village was severely damaged like this, in order to eliminate the resistance forces, and everything here was wiped out. "These guys are disgusting. They actually put Miss Vivi and Miss Nami in danger," Sanji said indignantly. Rog and Zoro were also ashamed after hearing Sanji's reason. "Anyway, we can't let these guys go," Rog said. "Of course," Sanji said. At this moment, more than 100 enemies set up machine guns on a position not far from the crowd. Each machine gun was in a group of 3 people, and about 40 machine guns were quickly aimed at the 4 people. "Fire!" More than 40 machine guns fired fiercely at the four people. So much firepower. Rog covered his head with his arms, and the cactus power armor on his body was strong enough to block a storm of bullets. The bullets hit the cactus power armor, but they all went in and couldn't penetrate the armor. Luffy relied on his rubber ability to be hit by countless bullets but bounced off. Both Zoro and Sanji stood back to avoid being hit. "You two grab my back," Roger said to the two. Zoro and Sanji grabbed Rog's back without saying a word. Rog took big steps and rushed towards the machine gun position. After a quick charge, Roger rushed in front of the enemy's machine guns. "Fire quickly. Damn it, bullets can't penetrate. What is he wearing? His defense is so strong." Soldiers manipulating machine guns fired violently. The bullets hit the cactus power armor on Rog's body like a rainstorm. The bullets hit the armor but could not penetrate it. At most, it can cause a certain amount of damage to the armor. But Rog had already rushed into the middle of the enemies. Zoro and Sanji jumped out from Rog's back. "Leave it to. Let's do it." The light of the knife flickered, and the Blackfoot kicked horizontally. The soldiers on the ground were killed one after another. There's also a finale. Rog charged fiercely, knocking away the enemy and the machine gun. Suddenly, shouts, gunshots, knives, and melee sounds could be heard above the machine gun position. These soldiers were also shocked by Rog's powerful fighting power. "How can these enemies be so strong?" a major said in shock. When he was shocked, suddenly a pair of hands grabbed him. Turning around, I saw Luffy coming over with his body strapped on his back. "What?" With a scream, the officer was knocked to the ground by Luffy. Luffy shouted happily, "I'm coming too." The four fought together, and the enemies on the machine gun positions were quickly killed. Jess looked at the situation on the battlefield, unable to shut up in surprise. "How could this happen? They can be so powerful," Jay said with his mouth wide open in shock. The officer on the side reported to him, "Our army suffered heavy losses. The machine gun unit was basically killed." "Well, we are a large force of 3,000 people after all. Attack them all." Jace gave the order in anger. After all, this king's army is a heavily armed force of people, and now it is fully engaged in dealing with four people. A large force of 3,000 people violently attacked the four people. The four found that the surrounding turbulent army surrounded them. "What's going on?" Roger said. "We seem to be besieged," Zoro said. "It's great, so many people are surrounding us," Luffy said happily. "Kill them," Sanji said. An army of 3,000 people fought fiercely with four people. Outside the village, four people were fighting fiercely with an army of people. Chopper, Dr. Gulliver, Usopp, Nami, Vivi, Marianne and Runkui took refuge further inland. "Is there something wrong, Usopp?" Nami asked. "Well, it seems that after Rog and Sanji went to the position, the enemy was in a mess," Usopp observed with goggles. In Usopp's goggles, thousands of people were fighting. "Of course, just to deal with four people. It's really scary," Marianne said quickly. "Gah," he said while running fast and breathing heavily. Onion Bear, Maria, Levin, and Lay also escaped here. The three people's faces were very gloomy. "Wapoli is really going to wreak havoc on the area," Levine said. "He's going to kill us all," Lay said angrily. "Because this is an area where resistance forces are entrenched, he wants to kill everyone with ruthless measures," said Maria the Onion Bear. For Maria the Onion Bear and others, this battle will destroy the countryside. The hometowns that have lived for generations have been destroyed. Wai Wei looked at them with a heavy face and said, "It's so abominable. The king of a country actually slaughtered his citizens like this." Nami, Usopp, and Maria the Bear all looked at Wai Wei. The king should be loyal to the people and gain the recognition and love of the people, instead of resorting to horrific suppression and massacres like this. Vivi said angrily. Seeing how brutal Walpole's army is now, Wei can no longer hold back. Even in the kingdom of Alabasta, which was in a civil war, the king's army was only fighting the rebel army. There will never be massacres of civilians. But Walpole was so shameless. At this moment, a voice sounded. You are right, Walpole does not deserve to be king. Wei and the others looked behind them. I saw a burly and scary man standing here. Usopp was also shocked when he saw it and said, what, it's a cow? No, it's a human. This man is as strong as a bull. The man scanned the crowd with calm eyes. Dalton. Onion Bear, Maria, Levin, and Lay said in surprise. Wei, Usopp, Nami, Maria, and Runkuai all looked at him in shock. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Pirate Plant Fruit. Author, Lee A Dream. Chapter 69. Onion Bear Maria continued to introduce, this is Dalton, the leader of the resistance. Dalton's imposing manner is calm, his body is burly, and his eyes are serious. Others thought he was really a cow when they saw it. He is Dalton. Usopp looked at Dalton strangely and said. After Dalton looked at the crowd, he looked at the messy mess in the countryside. Behind Dalton were nearly 100 people, all armed with weapons and tools and wearing cotton-padded clothes like the villagers. These people are members of the resistance. Are you all okay? Dalton asked. Maria the Onion Bear replied, fortunately, he was not injured, but the village is already in a mess. Then we need to go to the village to rescue those villagers, Dalton said, looking at the messy village again. The countryside is now full of collapsed houses and raging fires, many people are dead, wounded and trapped there. Dalton looked at Chopper and Dr. Guriva again and said, are you willing to help us? Dr. Gulawa said very easily, I usually don't do it if I don't have a good salary. But I hate Wapoli just like you. So I can help you. Dalton looked at the Dr. Guriva happily. The village had suffered such a catastrophe and many people were injured. Now is the time when doctors are very much needed, and Gulawa's doctor has amazing medical skills, and it is the time when she is needed for help. Dalton looked at the severely damaged village and said, it must be Wapole. He did this to destroy us. He wanted to turn everything into scorched earth. Please let us help. Vivi suddenly said to Dalton. Dalton looked at the girl with long blue hair, as if he had a feeling of déjà vu. You're not from here, Dalton said. Wei continued, that's not important, there are many casualties here. You guys need help too. Dalton continued to look at Vivi. If you want to come, just come, Dalton said. Usopp looked ashamed and said, oh, you are so good at making decisions. Nami also frowned. Wei said to the two of them again, okay, aren't Rog and Sanji dealing with the enemy's artillery? Usopp suddenly remembered something, and looked towards the village again. It seems that the four of them have disrupted the enemy's position. The village has not been bombarded anymore, Usopp said. Nami also looked towards the village, feeling much relieved. Let's help them too, Wei said. Okay, Nami and Usopp said. Wei and the others followed Dalton's people and walked towards the messy countryside. At the same time, in the outer areas of the countryside, the four Rogs fought fiercely with elite troops of the king's army. How about this? Roger rushed in front of an enemy carriage, raised the carriage and smashed it at another carriage. Accompanied by the violent sound, both carriages were smashed into pieces. The fighting soldiers of the king's army were all shocked. Why is this guy so powerful? The bullets and even shells of the king's army could not kill Rog. Just when Rog was beating the enemy into a state of panic, a burly figure rushed over. Roger looked at the figure. The other party was tall and burly, more than 4 meters tall. There is a cannon on his shoulder. He also carried a large axe on his back. The upper body is also naked in the ice and snow. That face was even more murderous. "Here comes a big guy," Roger said. The big man looked at Rog fiercely. "You bastard will die." The big guy took the shoulder cannon off. A thick muzzle aimed at Rog. "You want to blow me off?" Roger clenched his arms in front of his chest to protect his head. "Go to hell." The cannon in the big man's hand shot out. Rog was shrouded in flames. After the violent explosion, smoke enveloped the range of dozens of meters around. Many soldiers of the king's army were amazed. "Ah ha ha ha, it turns out that I, Roscoe, am the strongest," the big guy said proudly in a loud voice. This big man named Rascoli was originally a bounty hunter. Because he was favored by Jess, he was recruited into Wapoli's army with a lot of money. In the past, he had killed all the prisoners with a bounty of 1,800 million Baileys. Rascoli looked into the smoke. After the smoke from the explosion gradually dissipated, Rog's figure still existed. How could this happen? Roscoe looked at Rog in surprise. The cactus power armor on Rog suffered some damage, but it was still intact on the whole. Pirate Plant Fruit. Author, Lee A Dream. Chapter 70. "Don't even think about hurting me with this kind of injury," Rog said. Roger clenched his fists and rushed forward. Before Roscoe could dodge, Rog's punch was already in front of him. With a loud bang, Roscoe was hit on the head, and his whole body was blown away. Rascoli flew out and rolled on the ground more than 10 meters before stopping. A large group of King's army soldiers behind them were knocked down. Rascoli, who was knocked down, stood up again. His face was covered in blood. "Asshole, are you really capable?" roared Roscoe. This burly and frightening man took the giant axe off his back and held a giant axe that could cut through a yak in his hand. "It's time to fight hand to hand. I'll stay with you until the end." Rog clenched his fists and got into a fighting stance. "What?" Roscoe roared and charged like a yak. He raised the huge axe in his hand very high, and chopped it down on Rog's head. Roger dodged the attack with a dodge. At the same time the left hook was punched to Rascoli's head with enough force to destroy the rock. But this time Rascoli learned his lesson and escaped the attack urgently. "It's not small, and its movements are very flexible," Rog said. "I have strength and speed," Rascoli said. After Rascoli pushed more than 10 meters away, his leg slightly bent, and his body suddenly jumped over. Rog looked up at the sky, and Roscoe actually jumped to a height of more than 10 meters and then fell towards himself. This situation was really dangerous, and Rog slammed away. Rascoli's giant axe split the ground with a thick blade 3 meters deep. Picking up the giant axe, Roscoe attacked Rog again. Melee combat is really not weak, and you need to go all out to defeat him. Rog paid attention to the opponent's attack flaws during the battle. When Roscoe swung his giant axe and attacked, it was an opportunity. "Go to hell!" Roscoe slashed horizontally with his giant axe. Rog jumped up suddenly and grabbed the opponent's shoulder. "Give you a taste of wrestling." Rog swung Roscoe hard, and the big man was thrown out. Rascoli was thrown and crashed into a carriage. Rog suddenly found a cannon nearby, raised it and rushed towards Rascoli. Rushing to Roscoe's eyes, Rog brandished a cannon and aimed it at his head. There was an earth-shattering scream, and blood and teeth flew into the air. Rascoli rolled a few meters away. Taking advantage of the situation, Rog swung the cannon like a huge iron rod and hit the big guy more than 10 times in a row. Rascoli suffered grievous injuries with broken bones all over his body. Final blow. Roger jumped up and smashed the barrel of the cannon down on Roscoe below. The surrounding soldiers of the king's army were terrified by Rog's attack. With the last earth-shattering sound, the nearby white snow was blown away into a blizzard. Rog threw away the barrel of the cannon, and the Rascoli on the ground was smashed into the ground several meters deep. The blood all over his body was mixed with white snow, making it even more vivid. Huh, finally done. Rog panted heavily, and the cactus power armor on his body also suffered some damage. Rog looked at the surrounding King's army soldiers. Thousands of soldiers of the King's army shrank back in fright. Kill him, Jace also rushed to the front of the formation at this time. The commander of the King's army personally supervised the battle. Rog glanced at this guy, but the other party also had murderous eyes. And there was something terribly sad about Jace's odd face. Where did the clown come from? Rog said. After hearing this, Jess became furious and shouted, "Asshole, I am Lord Jess, the commander of the King's army under His Majesty Wapol." "That's not a clown, just call you wavy mouth," Rog said. Jace was still furious, and he quickly grabbed a longbow and an arrow from a nearby officer. "You use a bow and arrow," Rog said. Jace knocked the delicate arrow onto his longbow. "You will soon know what a sharp archer is." Jace aimed the artifact at Roger. "That eye is in the same line as the arrow of the bow." At this time, the King's army soldiers near Jace became stable again. Even the faces of some officers and soldiers were full of pride. Suddenly, Roger felt a strong sense of uneasiness. Even fear. The bow and arrow in Jess' hand didn't know when to shoot. Roger felt a sudden pain in his chest. A bow and arrow was already inserted into Rog's chest. It even pierced through the cactus power armor. The cactus power armor, which was impenetrable even to cannons and bullets, was penetrated. Roger looked at Jess. The guy had a smile on his face. "What a great archer." Roger yanked out the arrow from his chest. Fortunately, the cactus power armor blocked most of the attacks and did not penetrate his throat. Jace said proudly, "Well, even if your weird armor can block cannonballs and swords, it can't block my bow and arrows. Rogue's cactus power armor is strong enough to block guns and swords. The strength is naturally comparable to steel. But Jace's bow and arrow can actually penetrate steel." The surrounding soldiers of the King's army were very excited. "Your Majesty Commander, divine arrow technique. Commander, you are the patron saint of the drum country. Commander, kill this guy." Rog looked at this guy, but he didn't look at his wavy mouth. And those sad eyes. But what was shot was such a powerful divine arrow. "My pirate's archery ability can hit an opponent even from 1,000 meters away. The bow and arrow I use are special bows and arrows given by His Majesty Wapol. A super powerful bow and arrow made of the finest Wapol alloy. Genius the archers and sophisticated bows and arrows. The steel-like defense has also been penetrated," Jace said. Rog looked at this guy. It turned out that the opponent's bow and arrow was a special bow and arrow made of Wapoli alloy, and it was also the most sophisticated Wapoli alloy. Coupled with Jess' marksman ability, it's no wonder that even the cactus power armor was pierced. A sharpshooter needs a bow and arrow, with perfect precision and arm strength. Jess has fulfilled these requirements perfectly. Rog looked around again, and the soldiers of the King's army who had been intimidated just now had their morale boosted again. If Jess went to deal with Sanji and the others, the three of them might die too. He is still the most defensive among the four. Once oneself falls, other heat will also fall. "Jace, it seems that you and I only have one decisive battle." Rog was ready to fight desperately. Jace looked at Rog proudly and said, "You want to die under my bow and arrow so much? I will make you suffer for a while longer. So I have to start with your limbs first." Jace took another bow and arrow from a nearby officer. Pirate Plant Fruit. Author, Lee A Dream. Chapter 71. Put this bow and arrow on the longbow. Jace aimed at Roger's thigh. Rog felt a powerful murderous aura rushing towards him. Rog didn't see clearly when Jace let go. The opponent's bow and arrow had already hit his left thigh. There was a sharp pain in his left thigh, but fortunately the cactus power armor blocked most of the damage. "What a great archer!" Rog endured the severe pain and pulled out the bow and arrow. Jess saw that Rog's cactus power armor still prevented the powerful bow and arrow. Although it can penetrate the armor, it cannot really kill Rog. Looks like I need to shoot more arrows. Jace took 3 bows and arrows from the hands of the officers on the side. He put 3 bows and arrows on the longbow and pointed them at Rog. My lord can still shoot 3 arrows at once, Jess said. Jess is now tens of meters away from Rog. Relying on Jess' ability at this distance, he definitely couldn't stop it. Roger covered his head with his arms. After all, even if the opponent wants to shoot his limbs, it is still possible to attack the head in case. Suffer death. Jace fired 3 arrows. Roger was hit in the arm and torso by 3 arrows. The cactus power armor successfully blocked most of the power, but the 3 arrows also pierced through the steel-like armor. Roger felt severe pain in his arms, chest, and abdomen. Fortunately, it still only killed the flesh, but did not cause fatal injuries. Rog pulled out the 3 bows and arrows and threw them away. Now Jace took 3 more bows and arrows from the officer on the side. I'll give you 3 more arrows. Jess shot 3 more bows and arrows. This time, out of the 3 bows and arrows, 2 hit Rog's arm and 1 hit his abdomen. A man is nothing at this point. Roger pulled out the 3 bows and arrows. Rog had just been hit by a total of 8 arrows. In the current situation, in order to defeat the opponent, close combat is required. Jess is a sharpshooter, but Rog is sure of winning in close combat. Hey, pirate. You are in a desperate situation, Jess said to Rog. The words in that wavy mouth were full of sarcasm. Rog clenched his fists. Although there was pain in his body, he had to rush over. Once you rush over, you can defeat the opponent. Jess brought a special bow and arrow from the officer at the side. The whole body of the bow and arrow was red, and the tip of the arrow was a spherical object the size of a palm. Let me give you a new bow and arrow to try. Jace put this different bow and arrow on the longbow. After aiming at Rog, the bow and arrow shot out. The bow and arrow hit Rog's chest, but did not penetrate the cactus power armor. Suddenly there was a violent explosion, and the arrow exploded violently. The explosion was more powerful than a cannonball. Under the huge impact, Rog fell backwards. Damn this bow and arrow. Roger struggled to stand up and said. The surrounding King's army soldiers laughed when they saw Rog being blown over. Huh, what you were just hit with was my special bow explosive arrow, Jace said. Rog looked at the sharpshooter and said, do you have a lot of bows and arrows? Show them all. Jace looked at Rog and said, okay, I'll let you taste all my bows and arrows. Jace took another bow and arrow from the officer on the side. The whole body of this bow and arrow is purple. There is a palm-sized ball at the top, like a small cannonball. Try this. Jace put the bow and arrow on the longbow and shot it. Rog used his arm to resist the bow and arrow this time, but this time the bow and arrow still had no sharp arrows. After this bow and arrow was blocked by Rog's arm, it did not explode violently like the previous bow and arrow. The purple orb of the arrow splits open. Purple smoke quickly spread out from inside. What is this? Roger stepped back quickly. The purple smoke spread rapidly, and Rog took a few breaths inadvertently. After inhaling the purple smoke, Rog's body quickly became paralyzed. This is... Roger realized it was a poisonous gas. Jess in the distance looked smug. You were hit by my paralyzing gas arrow, Jace said. Rog gritted his teeth and held on. Although his body was a little paralyzed, it was not fatally injured. I didn't expect that you have all kinds of evil arrows, Rog said. Jace didn't stop, and took another bow and arrow from the officer. The whole body of this bow and arrow is blue, and the top is also a ball-shaped arrow with the size of a palm. There are even more wicked ones, Jess laughed with a wavy mouth. Jace attached this bow to his longbow. Aiming at Rog, the bow and arrow was also shot. What is it this time? Rog blocked the attack with his arms covered in sweat. The arrow of the bow hit Rog's arm. The arrow exploded, and streams of blue liquid burst out. The blue liquid enveloped Rog's whole body. "Why is it so sticky?" Roger said in shock. "You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." Pirate Plant Fruit. Author, Lee A Dream. Chapter 72. The blue liquid was very viscous, covering Rog's body. Roger is now chained. "Ahahaha, this is my sticky binding arrow," Jess shouted happily. Jess's continuous shooting of arrows was also exhausting his strength, so he handed the longbow to the officer on the side. "Okay, let me think about how to torture you to death next. Or capture you and hand you over to His Majesty Wapol," Jace said. Jess even took a good red wine from an orderly and drank it with his head back. Rog's body was severely restrained. Damn it, the body is so restrained that it's almost impossible to move. Rog struggled hard, but to no avail. Looking at the vast snowfield around him, Rog suddenly felt an unprecedented sense of despair. If it were a forest down here, just like the ancient island, then I would be able to, wait, plants. Roger suddenly remembered something. Jess and many soldiers of the king's army laughed at themselves happily. Roger squatted down. After all, his body was severely restrained, but he was still able to move properly. Roger began to press his hands on the ground. The plant fruit ability in the body starts to activate. Even the cactus power armor couldn't stop the green light, and it was transmitted to the ground below. There was still life in the earth below. And it's the smell of plants. Rog clearly sensed that it is a plant that grows under the snow and is suitable for cold winter. This plant is also a vine. Very well, since it is a vine plant that grows under the college. Then let's call you Snow Vine. Roger was extremely surprised. Jess, who was resting while drinking red wine, looked strangely at Roger, who was squatting down. Rog's posture was strange, and his aura seemed to be looking for something. "What the hell is this guy doing?" Jace said strangely. Rog continued to squat on the ground, the green light in his hand flickering more and more. "Okay, the snow vine hidden under the snow field. Help me." Rog emitted amazing fruit energy all over his body. Green light filled his whole body, passing through his hands towards the snow vines deep in the ground below the snow field. The snow vines within hundreds of meters around were all sensed. Jess also found something wrong with Roger. The sharp archer quickly threw away the red wine and took the longbow from the officer. "No matter what medicine is sold in this kid's gourd, I will prepare it." Jace quickly knocked the bow and arrow to the longbow. At this time, Rog had already developed the power of the plant fruits to the maximum. Snow vine. Defeat the enemy within meters. Roger yelled. Whether it was Jess or the officers and soldiers of the king's army on the battlefield, they all felt their feet tremble for a while. This is a force that comes from the ground. Above the snowfield, within 100 meters, countless vines rushed out from the depths of the thick snow. These rushing vines whipped towards the king's army. How is this going? Oh my God, these monsters are coming out of the ground. It's a snake, no, it's a vine. How could this happen? The soldiers of the king's army were in a mess. These vines rushed out from the ground like extremely vicious giant pythons, violently attacking the surrounding soldiers. Jess was also attacked by two vines. These vines use irregular movements to whip and attack enemies that can touch them. "What the hell?" said Jess. Immediately afterwards, these vines rushing out of the snow began to bind the enemies they encountered. "Oh my God, get back now!" Jess hurriedly ordered. The king's army was in a panic and began to retreat towards the rear in a panic. It was also Rog's attack that frightened these guys. Although the king's army is well equipped, they have never seen Rog's attack ability. Rog, who was surrounded by thousands of troops just now, was also happy when he saw how effective his attack was. However, the ability to use such a powerful plant fruit is extremely exhausting to the body. Rog's face is already purple, and his whole body is soaked in sweat. It's really powerful, but it's enough to get me out of trouble at this time. Rog was both excited and extremely tired. Rog continued to use the plant fruit ability. The palm continued to be pressed on the ground, and the green light was continuously transmitted into the earth. Several vines rushed out from the snow around Rog. These vines began to clean up the blue viscous liquid on Rog's body. Pirate Plant Fruit. Author, Lee A Dream. Chapter 73. The white viscous liquid on Rog's body was quickly cleaned off. Roger stood up again. "Okay, you can continue to attack the enemy," Rog said. The surrounding king's army was already in disarray. It was really dangerous just now. The most important thing now is to kill Jess. Rog still had those arrow wounds on his body. But now the battle can be said to be a race against time, otherwise it will be a failure. Rog jumped up and started rushing towards the chaotic king's army. The king's army is now retreating towards the rear wantonly, and the army of thousands of people was unexpectedly defeated for a while. Along with the king's army that was about to retreat, Rog saw Jace riding on a horse. Jess also saw Rog, the sharp eyes of the sharpshooter. "What, this guy actually caught up," Jess said in surprise. Jace saw Rog rushing towards him like an unstoppable giant elephant. Jace quickly picked up the longbow and quickly cocked the bow and arrow. "I'll catch you up and I'll kill you without a place to bury you." Jess looked back at Roger as he rode. "Get ready to shoot deadly arrows." Jess' tall horse galloped all the way, and some soldiers of the king's army were crushed under the horse's hooves. Rog already had precautions. Rog removed 2 iron plates from the 2 wagons that had been destroyed just now. Blocked the 2 iron plates in front as a shield. Jace fired a bow and arrow. Coming. The iron plate Rog used to block was pierced by the Wapol alloy arrow. However, only the arrow part of the bow and arrow penetrates the iron plate, and the tail and arrow body of the bow and arrow are stuck on the iron plate. Jace put 3 bows and arrows made of Wapol alloy on the longbow. This guy can also use an iron plate to block arrows. Jace fired 3 arrows. These 3 arrows were also blocked by the iron plate. Rog rushed towards Jace while using an iron plate to block the opponent's bow and arrow. Soon the 2 iron plates Roger used to resist became hedgehogs. But he was already close to Jess. Jess was frightened and quickly ordered the soldiers around him, "Hurry and stop him." These king's army soldiers were still elite troops, and many began to intercept Rog. No matter what, this pirate must be stopped. Everyone fights to the death and no retreat is allowed. Defeat this pirate and get seriously injured. The morale of the soldiers of the king's army was high, and they rushed towards Rog again. A large number of king's army soldiers lined up and pointed at Rog with their rifles. Fire! Hundreds of bullets were fired at Rog. Rog jumped up suddenly, and hit the king's army heavily. What? Amazing! Just like a meteorite. Rog rushed into the king's army, waving his fists and fighting fiercely for a while. The body charged like a raging wild beast. A large number of troops of the king's army were beaten into the air. The soldiers of the king's army had just mustered up the courage to confront Rog, but they were quickly suppressed again. The infantry dispersed, the cavalry arrived. The infantry brigade of the king's army, which suffered heavy casualties, quickly dispersed. Dozens of burly cavalrymen on handsome horses rushed over. The cavalrymen stabbed with spears. Rog looked at these cavalry and said, "Okay, let's see who is stronger." These cavalry were not the same as the frightened and flustered infantry on the battlefield. They also witnessed Rog's powerful strength, but there was no fear on their faces. "Charge and kill the pirates." The cavalry charged Rog with their spears forward. When approaching Rog, he quickly changed the formation of the cavalry. surrounding Rog like a huge collar. Well, there are formations. But the result is the same, Rog said. Suddenly, the cavalry rushed towards Roger from all directions around him. The cavalry stabbed at Rog with 3-meter metal spears. In this wave, more than a dozen spears pierced from all around. Rog also couldn't dodge all the attacks. When these metal spears touched Rog's cactus power armor, the cactus power armor, which was as defensive as steel, was actually pierced by the right spear. What? Roger rolled violently to avoid the attack. The cactus armor on his body was pierced in 5 places. Among them, there are 3 on the back and 2 on the chest. There was blood dripping from his back and his chest. More than a dozen cavalry returned to the formation. How could this happen? Roger said with a sharp pain in his body. Seeing that there are dozens of cavalry surrounding him tightly. The 3-meter black spear in the opponent's hand was unimaginably sharp. Could it be the material of these spears? At this time, a cavalryman spoke. The spear material we use is Wapoli alloy. It is extremely sharp, and the steel can be penetrated by the impact of cavalry. And our cavalry formation for you is the collar killing the enemy formation, which can be attacked or defended, and will restrain you like a trapped beast. Rog looked around. These enemies were very powerful. Now it is really under siege. These cavalry are more threatening than Jess. Pirate Plant Fruit. Author, Lee A Dream. Chapter 74. The dozens of cavalry around really trapped Rog like a huge collar. These guys are really difficult to deal with, Rog said. I was trapped in the enemy's cavalry position, and the enemy could attack or defend. If you don't break out again, you will be killed sooner or later. Looking around at the cavalry, Rog was about to fight. Either the fish dies or the net breaks. Roger first stared at a cavalryman. Rog used all his strength to rush forward like a giant bear. The cavalryman hurriedly brandished his black spear and pointed it at Rog. Rog rushed in front of the cavalry and avoided the opponent's spear. These cavalry charged even faster on horseback, but the 3-meter-long spears seemed inflexible in close combat. Rog snatched the 3-second-long black spear and threw the cavalryman away. Rog stood on the snow with a 3-meter-long spear made of Wapol alloy. All attacked. The cavalry quickly began their attack. The cavalrymen raised their spears and charged towards Rog. With a confident expression on his face, Rog brandished his spear and rushed towards the enemy. It will make you all fall off your feet. Rog quickly rushed to the side of a cavalryman. The spear in his hand was aimed at the horse and he stabbed it. The horse's body was penetrated, and the horse and the rider on it fell to the ground. Look, this is the first person to turn his back on his back. Roger said loudly. The black spear in his hand was stained with bright blood. The snow was also covered with blood from horses. After the first cavalryman was knocked down, Rog rushed towards another cavalryman who was rushing towards him. These cavalry are all wearing armor and holding 3-meter spears. They are very powerful in a straight line charge, and the spears made of Wapol alloy are enough to penetrate everything. But the sidewards do have a lot of obvious weaknesses. The opponent holds a 3-meter spear, which makes the flexibility very poor. Roger grasped this point and rushed to the side to assassinate the enemy's horses. There was another scream of horses, and the second cavalryman also fell. After stabbing 2 cavalrymen in a row, Rog rushed towards the enemy more bravely. What? Hiss. Asshole. Ow. Accompanied by the screams of enemy knights and horses, a large number of cavalrymen were stabbed down one by one. Rog became more and more courageous as he fought, wielding a 3-meter-long spear. Coupled with a powerful charge, he turned and killed among the cavalry for a while. The soldiers of the king's army who were watching were still very happy because of the victory of the cavalry just now, thinking that they were still the winners. But now the situation has changed to Rog bravely killing the cavalry. This guy really isn't built for you. Terrible. These pirates are really, why are they so powerful? Besides this guy, there are 3 monsters. It's really a headache. How to do it? Rog violently attacked the cavalry, and 17 or 8 of the cavalrymen were turned upside down by Rog's men. However, these guys were still well trained, and soon the remaining 30 or so cavalry quickly distanced themselves again. Rog also temporarily stopped attacking. The local formation has changed. From the original formation of a huge collar, it became a cavalry formation with straight sides on all sides. This cavalry formation is the same as a square. There were horsemen on all sides, all with their spears pointed forward, surrounding themselves. To deal with villains like you, now use 4 sides to crush the formation," said the cavalryman. Rog observes this formation, which is a one-sided or opposite two-sided charge. Otherwise, you will accidentally injure yourself. Although the flexibility is not as good as the previous collar, which is excellent in attack and defense, its attack power and impact power are greatly increased. They are indeed an elite force, Rog sighed. The cavalry also replied, "Yes, we are the felony elite cavalry under the command of Commander Jess. They all have the rank of colonel. It is also one of His Majesty Wapali's most elite troops." Rog is now surrounded by enemies and can be said to be in an extreme predicament. Now the only thing left is a gamble. Roger gripped the spear tightly in his right arm. Cheating took out the thorn whip. In this situation, once the cavalry charge, it is the time for the 2 sides to decide the outcome and life and death. The cavalry aimed at Rog with spears from all sides, front, back, left, and right. The 3-second-long black spear exuded extremely powerful murderous intent on the cold snow field. Anyone who stands in the way will be pierced through the body, suffering from pain within the body. Charge! The 2 rows of cavalry behind Rog, riding on tall horses, stabbed toward Rog with spears in their hands. At this critical moment, Rog threw out the thorny whip in his hand. This thorny whip is like a swimming snake, quickly stringing the horseshoes under the horses of the row of cavalry rushing forward. The original impact of this row of cavalry is amazing. With such a trip, he fell neatly forward. Roger jumped over the line of fallen cavalry. What? The other cavalrymen were all shocked. Rog quickly retrieved the thorn whip. The biggest weakness of this square 4-sided rolling formation is that once one side is broken, the whole will be shattered. Rog fled across the road, rushing towards the hundreds of King's army who were watching the battle. The cavalry behind quickly pursued. "Don't run, you bastard!" This was the first time that the members of this cavalry suffered such heavy losses, and they wanted to kill Rog no matter what. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Pirate Plant Fruit. Author, Lee A Dream. Chapter 75. The cavalry rushed towards Rog violently. Rog was rampaging among the king's army at this moment. Many of the king's troops were knocked away. After that, the cavalry who pursued Rog trampled on many soldiers of the king's army. The king's army is now suffering heavy casualties and is completely passive. The king's army of thousands of people fell into chaos again. Rog also deliberately led the cavalry behind him to charge among the king's army. Repeatedly interspersed with the king's army, causing the king's army to be repeatedly disturbed. With the powerful impact, the king's army suffered heavy losses. Rog did not forget to deal with these enemies during the charge. Rog seized the opportunity and stabbed a chasing cavalry horse from the side. The cavalry fell down with man and horse. Using this method, Rog stabbed down other cavalrymen one after another. Among the king's army, this group of cavalry lacked a formation advantage. Moreover, it was blocked by the soldiers and ordnance of the king's army as obstacles. Rog was able to stab all the remaining dozens of cavalrymen. After the remaining cavalrymen were stabbed down, the king's army was also in chaos. "Okay, it's your turn." Rog waved the captured 3-meter black spear and said. The king's army was already in chaos. Although Rog suffered a lot of injuries. But the whole body is full of enthusiasm, which is a good opportunity to take advantage of the situation to kill the enemy. At this moment, a familiar voice came. Roger, we are here. Sanji, Zoro, and Luffy also rushed from the other side of the battlefield. The three of them also went through several fierce battles, and their bodies and faces looked a little embarrassed. But the eyes of the three are full of fighting spirit. An unyielding fighting spirit, a fighting spirit that becomes braver as the battle progresses. You must have fought very hard. Let us destroy these enemies together. Roger said boldly. The four rushed towards the king's army together. The king's army collapsed further under the powerful offensive of the four men. Among thousands of troops, Jay saw that they were defeated by the attack of four people. Seeing this situation, Jess' inner anger finally broke out. He opened his big, wave-like mouth, and reprimanded him. An army of 3,000 people was beaten like this by four people. Are you still considered to be His Majesty Walpole's elite king's army? Don't retreat. Concentrate your forces quickly and eliminate the four people. Jess' roars and orders were like a stone sinking into the sea, without any sound. Now the elite troops of the king's army of thousands of people have been frightened. The four men charged hard, and the king's army retreated one after another. After fierce fighting, the king's army was continuously defeated. These are some murderous gods. Retreat quickly. These guys are going to kill us all. Rog felt happy for a while when he saw the defeated king's army. Just now this group of king's army bombarded the village wantonly, killing an unknown number of civilians. Now it's finally being punished like this. Don't show mercy to these guys. These guys just killed many civilians. Roger said to the others. Of course, Sanji said. My sword will not let these guys go, Zoro said. Knock them all away, Luffy said. The four charged fiercely, and the king's army continued to be defeated. Jess also saw that the situation was not good, so he hurriedly escaped on the tall horse. While the four were fighting fiercely, in the village, Dalton, Vivi, Nami, Usopp, Dr. Gulliver, and Chopper worked together to treat the injured. Dalton and his men quickly rescued the injured, while Dr. Gulliver and Chopper treated the injured. What a mess, Usopp sighed. Collapsed houses and burning flames are everywhere in the village. The dead and injured were everywhere, wailing everywhere, as if it was hell on earth. Nami looked here and sighed, fortunately, I left here in time. Wei Wei looked around, getting angrier the more she looked. As the Princess of Alabasta, Wei Wei has been full of responsibility since she was a child. It's too much. As the king of a country, he slaughtered his citizens so brutally. It's really unforgivable. Vivi said angrily. Nami looked towards the outskirts of the village again. On the snowy field there was the battlefield where the four of Rog and the king's army fought. There has been no news for so long, so it is obvious that the other party has been suppressed. Roger and Sanji should be fine, Nami said worriedly. Usopp looked in the direction of the outer battlefield. No problem, those four monsters are enough to give the enemy a headache, Usopp said reassuringly. Marianne was riding on the fast back, looking around in fear. It's really scary. I'd better draw a pattern. Marianne took out her palette and brushes. After a while of waving the paintbrush, Marianne painted green circles on her clothes. The leisurely green, under the effect of this green, Marianne also became very leisurely and peaceful. Usopp looked at her and said, your method is really good. Do you want some flowers too? Marianne asked. Forget it, Usopp said. Usopp and Vivi, along with Nami and Malin, continued on. There is a mother and son here, help them. Wei Wei suddenly found a mother and son and said. Beside a collapsed house, a mother and son were weeping. Are you all right? Wei Wei greeted the mother and son. Usopp and Nami also looked at each other and went up to help. The mother and son were slightly injured, but mainly frightened. The three of Wei helped the mother and child to the carriage under Dalton. Dalton's men also brought many of the suffering villagers to their wagons. Dalton stood in the middle of the road in the village with a complicated expression on his face. A person immediately came to report. Dalton, the surviving villagers have all boarded the carriage. Dalton nodded after hearing this and said, "Order to retreat." Then Dalton looked up extremely angrily at the highest mountain in Drum Country. This meter-tall iron bucket-like mountain is majestic and straight. At the very top is Walpole's palace. "Tyrant Walpole, you are not worthy to be a king." After Dalton finished speaking, he quickly went to direct the evacuation. Dalton and his men led a large number of villagers to leave here. Usopp, Nami, Wei, Marianne, and Runkuai, and D'Argulava and Chopper evacuated together. Further inland, there are also many pine forests. Everyone evacuated here. In addition, Dalton was worried that some other villages would also be attacked. Then he led the crowd to bring the nearby villagers here as well. After settling in the pine forest area, Usopp, Vivi, and Nami were all together. I helped a large number of villagers transfer just now, and several of them were also tired. Maria and Runkuai ate snacks and talked with some children. "I don't know what happened to Rog and the others," Usopp gasped. "They must be fighting with the king's army." "But wait for them," Wei said. "Those monsters will be nothing if they fight," Nami said with a sigh. Pirate Plant Fruit. Author, A Dream. Chapter 76. Usopp looked at the pine forest. The pine forest area is far away from the village, and even further away from the snowfield battlefield. "Okay, wait for a few more of them," Usopp said. Wei looked up at the towering magnetic drum mountain. The mountain peak is several thousand meters high, and new snow clouds have appeared on the top and upper part of the mountain peak. On this winter island, snow is the order of the day. Sure enough, not long after, another heavy snow fell. Heavy snow quickly covered the destroyed villages again. Put out those fires. On the outskirts of the village, the battlefield after the four of Rog and the king's army were in a mess. Broken ordnance and blood are everywhere. The goose feather snow covered them all, concealing all the cruel fighting. The four of Rog fought fiercely and finally repelled the king's army. The four Rogs stood on the battlefield like gods of war. The king's army in the distance kept fleeing. "I said, are you tired?" Roger said. "It's tiring, but it's also refreshing," Sanji said, lighting up his cigarette again. "It's such a huge number," Zoro said. "I really want to keep fighting," Luffy said. Rog looked at the messy battlefield and breathed heavily. The large amount of damage accumulated in the battle just now was finally exposed. Rog suffered serious injuries from his arms to his torso. "Ah!" Rog gritted his teeth and suddenly half-knelt on the ground. Sanji saw it and asked, "I was injured in the battle just now." Rog's face was covered with sweat, and he said, "Yes. Rog was severely injured in the battle just now." Luffy looked at Rog and said, "Rog, then go find that old woman for treatment." Sanji glanced at Luffy and said, "Fortunately, if you said something like that back then, she would have kicked you to death. But that old woman's medical skills are really superb," Luffy said with a smile. Rog looked at the distant enemy and said, "It's time for us to join Usopp and the others." "That's right, let's go," Sanji said. Immediately Sanji had a beautiful expression on his face again. "Well, Ms. Nami and Ms. Wei will definitely be very happy once they see our triumphant return. Especially seeing me." Sanji was about to dance. Zoro looked at Sanji in disgust, and said, "Hey, let's go quickly." Rog, Sanji, Saran, and Luffy returned to the destroyed village first. After the fierce shelling by the king's army, the village has been reduced to rubble. But Rog and others did not see the living people. "What happened? Did everyone run away?" Sanji said, looking around. "The people here must have escaped while we were fighting the king's army," Saran said. Well, where did Usopp and the others go? Luffy said. Don't worry about this, Usopp must have evacuated with the others, Rog said. Just when the four couldn't find Bay. Suddenly a figure rushed over. Rog looked at the figure, and at the same time the voice entered his ears. It seems to be it, Roger said. I saw running quickly, and Usopp was on the back. Usopp saw the four of them and shouted happily, "Ah, you won the battle." Luffy said happily, "Yes, we won." Sanji and Zoro looked at Luffy and said, "This guy is always so happy." Rog looked at Usopp and said, "Where are Usopp, Vivi and Nami?" Usopp said, "Ah, they and the villagers have all gone to the pine forest area." After hearing this, Rog said, "That's good." Miss Nami and Miss Vivi are not injured, are they? Sanji asked. No, because Captain Usopp, a brave sea warrior, defended them. No one was hurt, Usopp said proudly, pointing to himself with a thumbs up. That's good. I'm worried about the safety of the two ladies. Sanji's carefree face relaxed a lot. The realization of Usopp looked at Rog again, and Rog was sweating all over his face now, and his face was very ugly. Although the body is still wearing cactus power armor, it is also extremely damaged. Blood flowed from many wounds, and even the armor was stained red. Rog, your hands are really heavy, Usopp said. Roger gritted his teeth and insisted, well, I can still persist. Hurry up and go to the pine forest area. The nurse Gulewa is also there, Usopp said. Okay, Roger said. Under Usopp's guidance, everyone walked towards the pine forest area. The goose feather heavy snow in the sky is still falling non-stop. The fierce battlefield just now was covered with heavy snow. Everything is back to peace. Finally arriving at the pine forest area, Rog and Sanji also saw Vivi, Nami and the others. It seems that you have won. Wei stepped forward and said happily. Did you get rid of those guys? Nami said. Sanji said with a heroic look on his face, yes, under our heroic battle, those evil troops were driven away. Luffy kept shouting, ah, meat. Is there any meat or other delicacies? I'm so hungry. Wei quickly turned her gaze to Rog. Rog is now covered in wounds, even the outside of the cactus power armor is covered in blood. Rog, your injury is so serious. Hurry up and get it treated, Wei said. Nami also looked at Rog in surprise. Thank you for your care, Roger said. Wei led Rog to Gulewa's doctor. Dr. Gulewa is continuing to treat the injured villagers. Chopper was helping on the sidelines, handling the medicinal materials and medical equipment. Rog arrived in front of Dr. Guriva and looked at the doctor who had rejuvenated her body with wonderful skills. Dr. Gulewa glanced at Rog with her eyes. Did you have a fierce battle with the king's army? Dr. Gulewa asked. Roger looked directly at her and said, yes. After the doctor, Lady Gulewa sent away a patient at hand, she began to focus on Rog. Although Rog suffered a lot of physical damage, his eyes were full of unyielding will. I got some injuries, but please continue to treat the villagers first, Rog said. Dr. Gulewa looked at Rog, and Chopper came to Rog. The reindeer sniffed Roger, and he could smell blood clearly. You're seriously injured, Gulewa's doctor said. Rog did not deny it, but looked at Dr. Gulewa calmly. The heroes who fight against Wapol, even pirates. I have to give priority to treatment. Sit down. Dr. Gulewa said very seriously, her tone full of respect. Seeing that the other party was so sincere, Rog couldn't refuse. Started to use the plant fruit ability to unlock the cactus power armor on his body. With the release of the power armor, Rog's seriously injured body couldn't support it, and he half kneeled to the ground.